Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and I'm excited to welcome XYPN member Matt Miner, founder of Miner Wealth Management, to the show today. Matt started his career on the corporate finance side of business. After a few years, he took a break and went to B school to get his MBA, then worked with John Deere in several capacities before his career was impacted by a layoff related to a merger. His running partner was a fee-only advisor, and Matt became an intern at that firm. He was responsible for growing his own client base from scratch and shared how he found success getting those early clients. In 2021, after 3 years, Matt and the firm owner agreed to a buyout structure so that Matt could take his clients with him and ultimately start his own RIA. Matt was kind enough to share the details of that buyout, how it worked for him and the prior firm owner. Matt has been growing a really awesome firm as he is looking to do more than $350,000 of revenue in his third year in business. He shared his approach to fees and how he sees the fighting amongst advisors on the best or right fee structure as unnecessary, and also how he uses his fee as a client segmentation tool to ensure he's working with his ideal clients. Without further ado, here's my interview with Matt. Hey, Matt, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Alan, I couldn't be happier to be here. Thanks for having me.
So as a longtime listener, we met up at XYPN Live this year in Atlanta, and you said, hey, I want to be on the podcast. And I was like, excellent. So for folks who are out there who are thinking, I'd like to be on the podcast, shoot us an email, because that's the best way to get on the podcast is to reach out and let us know your story. And so I appreciate your directness and being willing to just say you wanted to come on the show and for taking the time to do so.
Oh, it's a real treat. Looking forward to visiting with you today and hopefully sharing some thoughts that will be helpful to your listeners.
Absolutely. So let's just start. We'll go back in time and talk about career path, and then we'll sort of catch up to where we are today. So can you talk to me about sort of your first career? You know, in your bio, you talk about graduating B school with a lot of student loan debt. So can you just talk about those early days and sort of what your career plans were?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I've always been kind of interested in money. I started out as a journalism major and then decided I wanted to have a family at a younger age and switched to a finance undergrad. So I completed that at Arizona State University and went from there to working in corporate cost accounting for Intel Corporation, doing CapEx analysis and stuff like that. They were putting up fabs in Arizona. And from that time, just decided that my interest was more in like being the general manager decision maker rather than advising the general manager decision maker, and wanted to go back to get my MBA, which is kind of a well-trod path. So I started out at Duke's Fuqua School of Business here in Durham, North Carolina, and had a wonderful couple of years there. I went through that as a full-time program, interned at John Deere in their management development program, and then took that job full-time coming out. We went on to move 5 times in 5 years with that job.
The beauty of management training programs. That's it.
You get to see and do a lot and you meet a lot of wonderful people, but we ultimately decided like not having control of your address is just too much to give up. So had the opportunity to step off that into an executive role with a John Deere dealership in North Carolina. That was in 2013, and decided we were going to do that. And along the way, like you mentioned, when I came out of business school, I had $225,000 in student loan debt. That's $2,009. So however that may have adjusted since then. And about a year after business school, some pretty thoughtful cousins who are also successful entrepreneurs gave me a copy of Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover that said, they'd inscribed it something like, we found this kind of interesting. I wonder what you think. And so read that and first was kind of like, grr. And then I was like, well, my plan's not working as well as I'd like, so maybe this guy can help. And at that time, we had 3 real young children, like 4, 3, and 1, or something like that. And so, on a pretty healthy post business school income, our family started living on like $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and quickly paid back those loans in about 3 years, and then paid off our house and started saving and investing. And I was like, I really like this stuff a lot. I was reading that was kind of like early days of blogging 2.0. And so very much like Mr. Money Mustache, Joshua Sheets' Radical Personal Finance, just kind of like the FinCon crowd, Philip Taylor, were all like very influential to me at that time. And so I started going to FinCon, started blogging myself. And in 2018, my then employer went through a merger, and one of the new owners was like, hey, I think I'd like to have your job. And so that was the end of my illustrious career in the tractor business.
I was gonna say, so that
And
was at John Deere that the
that
dealership
was at the
got sold.
dealership.
Okay.
Yep, the dealership got sold. And so this is kind of where I guess my financial planning career picks up. About a year before that, I had started trail running with a firm owner here in Raleigh who had been introduced to me by a mutual friend. And we'd been running together for a year. I lost my job on a Friday, and he and I had a run scheduled together over that weekend. And I was like, well, I'm just going to ask Josh if he'd be willing to think about taking me on. So I started with a fee only firm here in Raleigh, now called Ridgeline Wealth Management. And that was in June of 2018. After like a pretty nice post business school career, I started with the title of intern, making $3,000 per month. I think that's what you told me Kitsis was paid. Maybe he's had a raise since then.
Yeah, I think that's still what his salary is. So,
Well, that's probably the best company I've ever been in. But started that way, passed my Series 65, and basically started as a lead advisor. They did not want me, like, Josh, that firm's owner, is not interested in managing people. So he was kind of like, just go see what you can do. So worked on getting clients from day one. My first client, I charged $150, which it turns out is not enough, and was there as an employee for a little over 3 years. And at one point in that relationship, just came to Josh and was like, hey, I'm 40. I think we're pretty well together. I like this business. I was like, I'd like to either buy in or buy out. And my employment agreement provided for either. And he sort of sat on that for about 90 days. And he came back. He'd been going through some personal change in his life. And he just decided, he was like, I want less, not more, more focused, not bigger. And so we came up with a plan for me to acquire a portion of that business, and got registered in August of 2021. So Minor Wealth Management has been in operation right about 9 quarters. Made my first revenue in Q4 of 2021. So
okay.
anyway.
So yeah, just over 2 years in. Yeah, what an awesome story. I'm curious because I get questions from the young, I call them kids now, the college students who are like, oh, like what career path should I choose? And I've just heard the best things about these management training programs that the huge companies have, whether that be John Deere or Allstate, or I've heard like Enterprise Rental Car has a good one. Like, did you find that training program, I mean, obviously 5 locations in 5 years, like, did you find that to be a beneficial program that has sort of impacted you long term beyond just getting a job in a dealership, which obviously it led to that, but like, I guess, do you look back and think like, gosh, I'm really glad I had that experience. That's really helping me today.
I don't think anyone's asked me that exact question. I would wholeheartedly endorse my own former employer. I loved working at John Deere. It was a great cultural fit for me and met some wonderful people there, some of whom I'm still friends with. So that's kind of idiosyncratic to the firm. I think overall, if you're looking for a broad management exposure, that can be a great way to go. I think those programs are best if you really are a good fit with that company, and if you can kind of like stomach being at that company, maybe for your whole career, but anyway, for 10 or 15 years, I'd say programs like that, what they set you up for is kind of like headed for at least the director level within those firms. And so I think if that's your goal, can be really good. For us, giving up the autonomy over our address was too big a price, but
That makes sense.
But I would go back and do the same thing. The last thing I'd say, career is one of my like passions. I love to work on it with my clients, especially my clients who are maybe still in their 30s. And a mentor said to me when I was still in my 20s, like, basically, you're going to get a chance to trade off maybe experience, location, relocation, travel, pay, work-life balance. You can kind of pick some of these. I think that's, probably most of the dimensions that you would think about in an employed job. And you're just gonna have to choose. So for me, like coming out of business school, I could do finance in New York. It'd be really long hours, but the pay would be great. Management consulting, I was very drawn to, and it's one of the things that I love about this career is that I'm advising people. It's a natural fit for me. Management consulting, at least at that time, and still to this day, is typically like Monday out, Thursday back. Long hours when you're not traveling, and that wasn't a great fit for a young family. So we were like, well, we'll take the relocation deal because at least we'll be together. And the kids were young at that point. So that was how we thought about those different dimensions at that time.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think just the quality of some of those management training programs is underappreciated by those of us who have never been through them. I also don't want to overstate. They're certainly not perfect, but I mean, I've heard some of them can be likened to B school and going and getting your MBA and just the amount of I think we take for granted that like, oh, like some people are just born great managers and know how to manage a budget. And like those things are not innate to most of us. You have to learn, and you can either learn trial by fire, like some of us probably ignorantly did, or somebody can actually train you how to do it. So I also am curious then, after being in that management training program, then going to get your MBA. I'm curious if you look back on that experience as well and feel like you learned enough with that MBA program for it to have been worth the cost, both time and 3 years of living very frugally in order to pay that thing off.
Yeah, and just for clarity, like the management rotational program that we're talking about was my post MBA job. So I was Intel
Oh,
before
okay.
business
Sorry, I
school,
got
and
those
then
backwards.
yep, no, and that's fine. So there are maybe one level that you get recruited in at with a bachelor's degree, and then hopefully a different level that you're getting recruited post business school. But in terms of like, was it worth it? Absolutely. For me, when I was in my early 20s, I was committed to getting some kind of graduate degree. I'm kind of a geeky guy. I kind of enjoy probably sometimes too much learning for the sake of learning and reading for the sake of reading. I'm just like curious and enjoy that kind of stuff. I enjoy the people that I meet in academic programs. So I love Duke. It put us in a place that has become our adopted home. My wife and I are both West Siders. I know you're a native Southeastern guy. We like to vacation out west. Sometimes as much as 2 or 3 months a year, but we've really found a home here. So that I don't know how you put a value on that. And then just the program itself, I love. So I have a real soft spot in my heart for Duke, for University of Virginia, and for Dartmouth. I think that they just do a wonderful job placing students and just have a really great collaborative culture in their programs. And I think what I didn't know going into business school was that like when you go get an MBA, you're being trained to become a manager in somebody else's company. You're not being trained how to start a business or necessarily even run the business that you start. Obviously some MBAs do that, but you're really being trained to go help somebody else run their business that they've already built. And
Yeah.
I think it's great training for that. And then I think that some of that can generalize to what I do now. But it is funny, right? I mean, when you start a firm that's just you or you and one employee, it's like you're just doing totally different stuff. You're working on a much broader picture, and can be called on to do anything in any given day versus kind of like applying specialized training to maybe a narrow problem, but maybe you solve a narrow problem and it's worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to the
Yep.
business.
Yeah, our COO back in the day was getting his MBA, and I asked him, I was like, "Should I be getting my MBA?" And he was like, "No, just hire MBAs." Right? Because in the end, starting your own business is sort of like, again, a trial by fire MBA program. You don't necessarily get the theory of business, but you just have to figure it out. So, but everyone's path is a little different. So, and so I fast forwarding then to when you ultimately decided to get into financial planning. One of the things that you noted in our pre-interview was just that around how important and impactful informational interviewing and sort of networking were as you were breaking into the profession. So can you talk about sort of that and how that ultimately impacted where you took your career in terms of financial planning?
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't heard that term before, if you Google informational interviewing, there's a couple of great articles out there that are just a good introduction to that topic. And basically, what it is if you want to ask someone to help you with something, like that's a big ask. You're somehow asking for their time or reputation or commitment to to access that in a meaningful way. Whereas if you just say, "Hey, can we share a Zoom call? Can we get a coffee?" That's a pretty low barrier to entry. Many people will accept that request. Whereas if you call and say, "Hey, can I get a job?" That's a big request. So starting with that, what you want to do with these things is go and say, please tell me about what you have done. What have you liked about it? What have you not liked? If there was someone in my shoes, what might you say to them? And then like a key final question is, if the meeting has gone well, is like, is there anybody else that you would recommend that I meet? And if they say yes, hey, are you willing to send a quick email introduction? And by doing that, you're just quickly accessing not only your own network of 100 or 200 or 300 people, but potentially, multiplying that by the same number of people as they sort of think about that. And then in the same way that you guys talk so much and so effectively about how if if you have a clear niche for your advisory business, when someone hears that niche, oh, he or she serves divorced women from tech or whatever it might be, that in the same way people go, oh, that person is looking to do X, Y, or Z, maybe join a fee only advisory firm as an intern or whatever it might be. And so by going through that process, you just dramatically open up opportunities that would be hard to get by asking directly, but can be accessed kind of obliquely.
So was this something that you were doing before you got into financial planning, or once you started at that firm, then sort of leveraging that to start building up your client base?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that's always been something that I have used to work toward different jobs. All of those different jobs that I've had, both getting into the firms as well as the next job within the firm once you're already there. As it relates to this career, what I would say is that it was a version of informational interviewing that ended up with the introduction to the firm owner who ultimately hired me. And
Very
so
cool.
when people are saying, hey, I just can't find a job in this field, like the job that I ultimately got is not one that anyone ever could have found because it didn't exist. So you're just going to have to go talk to enough people, and there's probably something out there.
Okay, very cool. So you really, I mean, talk about getting thrown into the deep end. You get a job with an intern title and told like, good luck, go get your own clients. Tell me about those early days and how you found success getting the sort of initial client base in order to create sort of a sustainable income stream.
Yeah, I think to be clear, like I was greatly helped, even though I did not have a lot of direction. I had some salary. And so that gave me some runway to work through this. It wasn't what we were used to having, but in the same way that you guys talk about like being financially prepared to launch a firm, you can also be financially prepared to take up, 75% pay cut and live with that at least for a time. So as far as like success finding clients, I was definitely reaching out to my business school network at that time, and that remains an important source of clients for me till now in various ways. And so they were all willing to have coffee or have a beer and just talk about that. And in the same way, you're not going to say, hey, will you sign up? You're going to say, hey, I'm doing this new thing. And if you know anybody who needs help, I hope you'll think of me. The very first client, like I mentioned, actually the first 3 or 4 clients were all people going through divorce. It's just such an obvious transition that was even pre it was pre the time when you could no longer deduct alimony. So we were doing some of those calculations over whose tax rate did we want to apply to the financial settlement and stuff like that. So that was the first handful of clients that came in. One was a business school classmate, another was a former client of another firm. And then I just was fortunate in talking to a lot of people about what I was doing to begin to add some clients of some size. I went back and looked at this, and even though I was not a firm owner for those first few years, the revenue tracks a lot with the benchmarking surveys that you guys do. So like my first half year in business was something like $3,600 in revenue, and then was like 24,000 in the first full year, and then like 65,000 in the second full year, and then was on track for probably about 120 in the third year that would have been a full year, but we ended up with a partial year, and it was less than that, and kind of transferred some of that revenue to the new firm. Anyway, so those clients were just coming from talking to people and then being clear about what I did, even if I was not totally crystal clear in terms of precisely who I was doing it for.
Very cool. Were you able to get some clients from the firm owner as well that maybe didn't meet his minimums or something like that? Like, was there sort of an internal referral source?
So I was servicing some clients of that firm, roughly a half dozen or 10. I mean, it wasn't a lot. That firm has about 150 client households, and they were just clients that for whatever reason, they weren't even necessarily especially small. They were just clients where the firm owner was like, hey, I've had trouble getting these people on the phone. Why don't you see if you can schedule a meeting with them and find out what's going on? So there was some of that went on. And, ultimately a few of those clients came with me when I launched, but most of the clients who came with me were clients that I had originated for that firm.
Okay. So remind me, what year did you start with that firm?
Yeah. I started in June of 18 and I left
18.
in
Okay.
August of 21.
So in 3 years, I guess where were you at then when you ultimately decided to launch your own firm? How many clients, what kind of revenue were you at that point?
I was hoping you were going to ask me because I got some notes together for you, Alan. So I left with 27 client households, 23 of whom are still with me. And of the 4 that are not, 1 left who I would rather have stayed. 1 moved to India to be with family. And then 2 of them married each other. So that collapsed the households from 2 to 1. And then I wish I could say they met at a client event, but they were engaged when we started working together. And then the 4th, I hired, and he's now my part-time W-2 employee. Joe Bray is a CPA in Atlanta, and he was one of my very early clients.
Oh,
And
very cool.
we've now been working together as colleagues for about 6 months.
Okay. So you had 27 clients, and then what was sort of the revenue model at that time?
Right. So that was, I added that up for this show. If we had just annualized those 27 clients, that was about $155,000 in annual revenue. And it was made up of roughly 80% AUM billings, would have been roughly 12 or so million dollars in AUM, and then about 20% in advice pay billings for ongoing retainer type of clients. So that was the makeup.
So to grow from 0 to 155,000 recurring revenue in 3 years is amazing, especially like no career, no experience in this industry, and as a that sort of thing. Like you just really hit the ground running. So what do you attribute that early success to be able to grow that fast and just be able to bring on those clients?
I think one of the things that was really key, and you gave me the chance to share it here, was just like having that story for why I was in this business resonated a lot with both the young professional clients that I was onboarding, as well as the older pre-retiree clients who were like, okay, this person has some actual experience doing something, even if it's not exactly as a financial advisor. The other thing that I thought about, and have been going through this a little bit as Joe and I work together, is like I came to this with a very fully formed philosophy of financial planning. So I didn't have to go learn that. And I even had like a philosophy of the firm, like should be advice focused. It's fine how you want to bill. Clearly I'm operating in the AUM model substantially, but the thing we do that adds value is advice,
Mm-hmm.
and then the way that you have wealth is by having a good career or business and living below your means. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be, I tell clients that your career or your business is your get rich money and minor wealth management is your stay rich money. So we're not here to hit home runs. We're here to hit singles and doubles. We're here to have broadly diversified, solid performance. If you want to outperform, go get another promotion or go get another client, or cut your household expenses. Whatever of those things you want to do. Those things you can really control. Whether we get 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10% on your portfolio, we don't know.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Are you able to share sort of how the buyout was structured? In just because I know we probably have some advisors who are in this position, but also folks who are hiring, their first advisor or two, and want to do right by by the advisor, but also want to protect themselves. So, can you tell me sort of how that was structured for you in terms of the buyout and just
Yeah.
the terms associated with that?
So first of all, I think that that's a really good consideration on both the employee and the employer side. Joe and I work through this in his contract that he has with me right now. And what I would say is, in general, what I had was pretty generous while being fair to both sides. So the clients who came with me came at a 2 times revenue multiple, and the way we structured that was, in round figures, a third cash upfront, a third as owner financing, being paid over 6 years, and a third as a revenue share being paid over the same 6 years.
Mm,
So basically, I had substantial skin in the game with the 1/3 down payment. The note is formalized as a promissory note that I owe whether I'm successful or not. And then the revenue share, he's participating in my success, retaining or not retaining or growing the clients. as I calculate that each quarter.
So on the revenue share portion is just for rough math. If you had 155,000 recurring revenue, let's call it a $300,000
Hmm.
total buyout,
Yep.
100,000 cash, 100,000 owner finance. And then the revenue share, I'm assuming that was a percentage. Does it cap whenever you hit that 100K, or did you sort of, is it a percentage
No,
forever? Like, how did you structure that?
great question. So there's no cap on it, but it does end. So it ends
Okay.
after 6 years along with the note payment. But it's just, I'm going by memory here, but I think it's 11.67% of collections per quarter goes as the revenue
Okay.
share. So in real numbers right now, and I assume we're going to talk about where the firm's at today, but in real numbers right now, it's something like a $34,000 after tax payment that I'm making for 6 years. So it's substantial because you got to earn 50 maybe or 60 even at my current modest income to to pay that $34,000 after tax.
Obviously early years will be a little less, later years, hopefully if things keep growing, there'll be a little more. But if
Yeah,
the average ends up being 35,000 over 6 years, that's just shy of $200,000 for what was $100,000 portion. But let's not forget where interest rates are at today. Like, you're
sure.
not that far off from just if you today went to Live Oak Bank and got a loan to buy out that other third,
Yeah,
you would
there'd be
probably have
9 or
paid
10.
about the same. And this is a little bit lower risk because it's not it's not secured by the business. It's not a pay no matter what, like a bank loan is. This is
Yeah.
I guess, higher risk for him, lower risk for you. That, like, if you just don't make more money, he doesn't make more money. And if you make great, he makes great. Like that's a really interesting, unique setup.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting to hear from you, who've talked to a lot of firm owners, that it's unique. For us, we landed on it without a lot of difficulty.
Fair. Yeah, I don't interview a ton of people who have bought firms, but this is more Kitsis's realm. But that does feel unique. I mean, I do know that there's earnout, that can be revenue based that firms will do, but I generally see it's like, we'll take 10% of collections until we hit 150% of our investment, and then sometimes there will be kind of like a warrant kicker at the end, and we own 2% of your firm should you ever decide to
Mhm.
sell. Like, I see that in tech. We've gotten offered that at Advice Bay before. Those types of structures, just to it does sort of tie everything together in terms of how you're billing, or I guess how you're growing the business, and then how they're compensated. So and so is your structure with your employees similar? Are you using all of these levers, or did you structure it a little differently?
Yeah, I think I was very self-conscious when Joe and I got together to say, honestly, I'm not looking to hire another me. I think that one of the, maybe the only aspect of kind of ill fit between me and my former firm was probably just that I always sort of thought of myself as an entrepreneur within that firm, and that has limitations. Whereas Joe, well, I think would be able to have that owner mindset, and I hope that we may partner formally in the future if things go well. That's certainly something we've talked about. He is not, at least up to this point, he has not had an interest in building and growing his own firm. And so, but to answer your question, yes, we have in our agreement not agreed formally on a buy-in price, but actually my solicitation price is. And I probably shouldn't discuss the details of my employee's contract on your show. It's similar. He can solicit clients from me if he wants. It is maybe not quite as friendly as what I had, where I think Josh was willing to just see this go both ways. I'm definitely more interested in building an enterprise where we're all working towards one goal. Hey, if you want to leave, yeah, there's a mechanism for that, but mostly we're here to work together.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I appreciate you sharing what you're able to. I think, the world has also shifted over the last, really even just couple of years, in terms of how employment agreements can even work and how non-competes work and that sort of thing. And so I really like the idea of entering into a business relationship, knowing how you get out. In a way, it's kind of like a prenup. And I will say, getting divorced is easier than breaking up from a business partner. It is messy. It is hard if you are not on the same page. And so and I do see this more often now than we used to, and that is firms structuring it as sort of this, like, I'm not going to tell you which clients can go with you or which ones can't. It's too hard to say. If I sent you a client, or I gave you a client, or you brought this client in, like, what happens if an existing client of mine refers you a client? Who gets credit? Like, it's basically just if you accept a client from this firm in your practice over the next 24 months, you owe us 2x, 3x revenue. Like that's
Yeah.
just it. And then how you structure the payment terms and all that. And I like that. I had that at one of my prior firms. It always felt like that was a way to ensure the firm was compensated, kept things clean. Again, we didn't have to track all these things, but also, gave the advisor the opportunity, like if they ever decided they wanted to leave, then they could, and not feel like they were starting over from scratch or going to get sued if they brought over a client that, their parents were their clients and suddenly you're getting sued because you took that client with you. So in 2021, you had 150,000 of recurring revenue. Where are you at today, sort of 9 quarters in, just over 2 years into the business?
Yeah. So we are at 47 client households today. So I think that net of the 4 we've lost, that's something like 22 new clients. And of those, 10 are advice pay clients with an average annual fee of $6,180, and then 35 are AUM clients with an average fee of just over $4,500. So where we're at right now, I think we'll end the year right at 270 collected.
Okay.
And my hope is to be between 350 and 375 for 2024 collected. So that's, we managed to add something like $65,000 or $70,000 in gross revenue this year, and definitely felt the effects of like bringing on and training my first employee. My daughter also graduated from high school. We took a 31-day trip in the summer. Like it's not been a totally focused kind of year. And so I hope we can do a little bit more from a growth standpoint next year. Joe has passed his Series 65. He's doing a super good job in his work. And so just looking forward to 2024. But that's where we're at.
I mean, yeah, that's incredibly impressive growth over 2 years to go from 155 to 350. I mean, just 350 to 375 going into year 3. Like that's above the curve, I believe, in terms of sort of the typical path that we see. So you mentioned you have a certain number of their advice pay clients and a certain number of AUM. Do you have any clients that are paying you both a planning fee and an AUM fee, or do you sort of have 2 different service models there?
So this is one where I was really excited to talk about this today. The way I really see fees is as a client segmentation scheme, as opposed to a big philosophical battle or a different way of paying for different services. I know that there are extreme opinions on this. We're going to provide financial planning and investment management services to all of our clients who are willing to take us up on it. And we're going to try to charge a minimum fee that we believe is sufficient for our business needs. Where that is right now is $7,200 per year. That's where we're trying to onboard people for about the last 18 months, either as AUM or as advice pay clients. And that translates into a minimum asset level or into if they can't meet that, right, then we're going to do an annual fee paid as an advice pay subscription. And then I think we're going to try to raise that to $8,400 for 2024. I say that with fear in my heart, but anyway, that's where we're headed. And the deal there is, like I said at the start, like we really feel that financial planning is where the value is, and so we're going to do that for everybody. And then clients get to tell us, do they want help to manage their investments, or do they want to do it themselves with advice from us? And most of our clients choose to have our help for investment management. But if we are charging them a $7,200 advice pay fee, for example, we're going to offer to open and manage all of their accounts at Schwab included in that fee. And if we're charging them a $6,000 a year AUM charge on their assets with us, we're going to provide as full-throated a financial plan as we possibly can in exchange for that healthy fee that they're paying us.
So effectively, you're charging, you have an AUM fee structure, and if someone doesn't have the assets to meet that minimum fee, then they're just paying a minimum fee, essentially of $7,200 a year, going to $8,400 a year, leveraging advice pay. Have you had anybody move from planning fee to AUM? And do you wait till, just rough math, at $7,200, you wait until they hit $720K of AUM to bill 1% on, or are you doing it incrementally and sort of, we've historically called that a fee offset, where AUM fees start to go up, so planning fees start to come down?
So what we tell clients is what asset level they would be able to meet our minimum fee at, and then we tell them we'll do a new contract at that time.
Okay.
So it's either or right now. I feel like the billing would be a nightmare for me to figure out. So we're just going to do take it out of their checking account, and then hopefully before too long we'll take it out of their investment accounts.
Yeah, that is a feature we've looked at AdvicePay. And for listeners, we are not committing to building this. And it's not even my job anymore to tell you what we're going to build, since I'm no longer the CEO there. But yeah, trying to find a way to balance, like, hey, AUM fees are going up and down. How do we offset with a planning fee and getting approvals from the client? All that. It is a mess. But at some point, I think tech can help solve this. So
Maybe. And I listen sometimes I listen to your podcast with great enjoyment and learning. And like, if I had one thought to share with my fellow XYPN nerds, would just be like, just don't make it that complicated. Like,
yeah,
if you're kind
people
of
care
niched,
way less than we do.
they care so much less. And the harder it is to explain, the way harder it's going to be to sign them up. So like, if you are niched a bit, you know, I've heard you and Alan talk different times about like different levels of gross income that are applicable to your fees. And so I tend to try pretty hard to be in that 2.5 to 3.5% of gross income. So I want to be at the top end because we think we're providing top end service. And so then that effectively means something like, okay, you got to be at maybe $200,000+ as a household to make sense to work with us. Ideally, most clients are going to be like 250 to 500 as a household. And then we're going to translate that into that fee. And so we don't have a complicated assessment tool. It's just like, okay, couple of professionals, 400,000, that's the minimum fee, because that's our bread and butter as far as the client we want. A doc and a public company exec making 1.3 million, we'll go up from there. But but I don't tell them some sliding scale, just here's the annual fee. Do you think that would work for you?
So what you're saying is that it's not just $7,200 for anyone until they hit a certain asset minimum, that you are looking at income and complexity as well. So that household that makes 250K is going to pay less than the household that makes $1 million in assuming zero assets for both of them, or negative net worth because of debt. Like, the $1 million client's going to be paying you more than the $250,000 income client.
Yeah. But there is not a complicated rubric to calculate that. It's my estimate of complexity.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone ever push back on like, hey, why is this 9,700 instead of 9,500? Like, do you get that level of like, can you explain to me how you came up with this fee? Or are you really attracting prospective clients that are just sort of looking at the fee in total and assessing value based on it?
I think the latter. I definitely have had people say, I think your fee is higher than I want to spend, and that's okay,
Yep.
And so that does happen. And I figure if that never happened, it'd mean the fee was probably not where it should be. But I don't have anyone ask me to justify the details of how the fee is calculated. I'll typically position it as our minimum fee is, for example, $7,200. You fit the profile of a great client for us, that's going to be your fee. Or I'll position it as, like, sometimes in a prospect call, people will, before I have full details, will ask me, what is that fee like? And I may have to give them that minimum fee and then say it may vary in your case when it turns out that they have, stock compensation, 2 rental properties, and their income is 800,000 or 900,000.
I mean, there is admittedly a level of income where people, I would say, stop sort of nickel and diming folks like financial advisors. Just, they have an ability to pay, a willingness to pay. Their time is worth so much in terms of income earning potential that, if I'm making $1 million a year and you're charging me 10,000, it's like, that's kind of like a rounding error, for these folks. And you're providing way more value than that, which is how both sides want to feel. We definitely see that advisors are, when they get really complex with the fee calculation, it does make it difficult, especially if you show the client, like, here's all the variables, and it's like, oh, well, maybe I don't want that service. Or what if you don't talk to my husband? Then does that make me a single client? And so on the AdvicePay side, we built the fee calculator just because we found it helped advisors put all that complexity variable stuff on the back end and just be able to say, well, your fee is going to be $9,000. And if they ask why, it's because that's what the calculator says. And it just like gives confidence to even just be able to say the fee, which is, I'm sure someone with a background in psychology could explain why that is to me, but it's definitely helped folks just be able to get comfortable with the fee. But, I agree with you that there's no right fee structure. There's no right service model. We have gotten the reputation that we hate AUM, or we believe AUM's evil, and it's not true. I don't think people who sell in commission are evil people either. I think that, I wish fee only had been called fiduciary only, because that's really what we're all in this for, is we just want to do right by the client and align the fee structure to the services that they're getting, the value they're getting, and make it make sense. So with that, listeners know we are not anti-AUM. We got a lot of AUM advisors. I think something like 80-something% of our advisors do have an AUM fee at some point with client relationships. So we just want to see financial planning available to folks who historically have been excluded. And now it almost sounds comical, but like that $1 million client that you talked about, they have no assets or negative net worth, and they make $1 million. The vast majority of traditional planning firms will not work with them. They will not just charge them a $10,000 fee, even though that may be their fee minimum, which is remarkable that those clients can't find fiduciary advice, much less a client that has household income of $150,000 or $200,000.
Well, for all those firm owners that can't handle the $1 million revenue income client, you can refer them to Minor Wealth Management, and we can take very good care of them.
Absolutely. Either refer or go sign up for Advice Pay and just charge them directly. I do think there's like this missing piece of just, they literally don't know how to charge. They don't want to get checks, which I understand, and they just don't have that functionality in their business. So make the referral or sign up for Advice Pay. One thing that I did notice too is that you have a podcast yourself. And so can you talk about the desire to start a podcast and how that has impacted the business?
Yes. And I have to say, with apologies to listeners, podcast production has been sparse since I became self-employed. So I've released 2 episodes. I have a couple more episodes that I want to release yet this year. There are about 45 episodes out there, and I'm very, very proud of all of them. So that podcast is the Work Pants Finance Podcast. Came through an initial trademark infringement claim that was made against me for my first podcast, the name I'm certainly not going to say here on this show, but we got through that. I own the mark on Work Pants Finance. And the idea there, the tagline of that show is to make a financial plan that works as hard as you do. I first started podcasting in 2020 and have had quite a number of clients come to me through that. I think probably very much like XYPN Radio. When people come to you through the podcast, you're always just startled by how good fit they are, because like they've been listening to 30 hours of your voice perhaps, and they're just like, I want what you've got. And I tend to really often recognize my ideal client in people who come in through the podcast. So the idea with Work Pants Finance Podcast is it's a mix of, I would call it career, life, and money advice and thoughts. I have tended to alternate between interviewing people in that space who I think have good stories to tell, with like taking a theme from one of my interviews and producing a solo show where I go into that. So I might interview a management consultant, and then I might talk about what life is like on a management consultant salary and what are the things that you might want to think about doing with that. That's, I guess, just an example. Some favorite episodes have had my wife on there to talk about homeschooling, have had Jeopardy winner on there who was an MBA classmate who did that, have had a couple of favorite professors, a number of successful entrepreneurs, one of whom is still running a great big business, some others who exited for about $25 million, and just different things that I think are of interest to the kind of people that I would like to serve as a financial advisor.
Very cool. One of the misnomers out there is that starting a podcast is starting a business. I do not believe that. There are a few podcasters out there who can make money doing it, but it's very, very rare, and it requires a lot of affiliate links to Blue Host or whatever the domain is, or website hosting. But podcasting is a marketing tool for a business. And so if you leverage it as such and really think about it in that context, then it can be really powerful.
I think the key with the podcast at this point in like none of us are out there to win the internet at this point. Like, we're looking to niche down, talk to a few people, but what you want to be able to do is direct them to your own service offering at the end of that. And so it's perfect for XYPN. It can also work for a financial advisor.
Absolutely. So one of the other things that I saw that you made a note about was, and this is a quote from you, I aim to help my clients increase the sleep well at night factor. So sleep well at night factor is all capitalized, and then you have it sort of in parentheses, SWANF. Can you talk about that? Is that a phrase you use with your clients? Does that speak to sort of your planning philosophy and how you ultimately work with your clients?
So I think it was a very meaningful moment. It was pretty early in my career, and it's a client that has really been one of the clients that has enabled me to continue in this business. They just are a great joy to work with and have a lot going on. And what I hope for out of meeting with a client is that they leave there with a sense of peace and confidence about their money and then how that relates to their life. Like, you have enough, or you're on track to have enough. Or if you don't have quite as much as you wanted, here are some levers we can pull where you'll probably still be okay. And so I would say that I do communicate to clients in terms of, hey, if we do this right, you are going to feel a sense of relief and peace about your finances that you maybe didn't have before we worked together, or at least you'll know areas that need shoring up. I kind of put that in there in the intake form just to highlight that. So it's not like I haven't trademarked that one. It's not in any of my marketing literature, but it is something that I aim for.
Yeah, that's one of those. When you work at a broker dealer, if you said sleep well at night factor, the compliance team would freak out because you're guaranteeing better sleep. No, I do love it is so difficult to explain the value of financial planning. So often it's until you experience it, you really just don't get it. And using phrasing like this, telling client stories and success stories and how you've ultimately helped clients sleep better at night. Like those are the things that ultimately help connect a prospective client to the service you're offering and give them an opportunity to give you a shot. And the retention rates of clients in our industry is just astronomically high. 95 to 97%. I think bad firms that have high turnover still at like 93, 94% retention, which is just unbelievable. And it just speaks to the value of what we do, that clients truly do appreciate it. So in our closing minutes, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past was just that your path into this industry was unique, as everyone's path is, in terms of how they ultimately decide to start a business and become an entrepreneur. Can you talk about, I guess, sort of your passion around helping people see that there is a path for them in this industry?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think that what I had really hoped to leave people with is that you can listen to this podcast and all of the XYPN radio podcasts, or a good handful of them, and just see a lot of templates for how a lot of different people have done it. Listen to some, and I'm just amazed by the success that advisors have had. And they all look different, but at the same time, if you're willing to just keep trying, like, it will work. I think that I could not have predicted that I would be here. Certainly different path, as far as I know, than any of my business school classmates took. But this is exactly where I would want to be. And like, was there some path that could have gotten me here faster and probably a lot more cheaply? For sure. But at the same time, it's like, well, it's your life, so it's gonna unfold the way that it unfolds, and you can just kind of do the best you can with that. But I think a lot of times people ask us, we've homeschooled our 3 children throughout their entire career, and they're now 18, 16, and 15. And we'll tell them, like, homeschooling is not for everybody, but if you want to do it, you probably can. And I think that firm ownership is that way. There's probably a way for you to do this, and XYPN has been instrumental for me, especially in the people that I have met through that organization. And then would just certainly give a shout out to Jeff Snodgrass and to Terry Hang, who have been very helpful directly in my firm. And then the conferences, for me at least, when you go to XYPN Live, I feel like, okay, I'm here with my people, and it's a great event. So those are just some thoughts on getting into this, that, like, if you want to do it, you can probably find a way to do it. You probably can't predict in advance how it's going to go, but if you'll keep trying, it'll go well. And then where I've seen it like not go well, it's because people, got bogged down in some kind of details, or they had one plan, and when that didn't work, they didn't try another plan.
Yep. Yeah, there is just an essence of of resiliency, grit. There's a lot of research now that has come out on just how much that matters in terms of long-term success for all of us. Is that if you're only set out to get A's on your test, that does not prepare you for the real world. It's one of the reasons listeners probably know I was homeschooled from second grade all the way through 12th, and one of the biggest things I appreciated about being homeschooled was that it does allow for I would say the development of more resiliency, the ability to fail, maybe more so than what I see in my kids are in public school system, and maybe some of what I see there. But you're absolutely right that especially when I don't actually know if Mike Tyson said this, but the whole, everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face. I'm not sure if he was enough. I don't know if he really said that, but it's a quote attributed to him. And I absolutely believe that to be the truth. When you start a business, you will have a plan and you're going to have it all mapped out. And when you go to B school, you got it all mapped out, and then you're going to get punched in the face repeatedly. And you have to adjust. And what you think is going to happen won't. And, in that analogy, the fight is going to go differently than you expect. And that's okay. And you just have to be willing to continue to maneuver and make it work for you. Because if you're not, then to your point, maybe the W-2 route working in a firm is a better fit for you. And that's totally fine. There's no shame in that. There are, some of Michael's research shows that, entrepreneurship does not actually have enough of a reward component for the risk that we take when we start a business. Like being a W-2 employee is awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. So, awesome. Well, Matt, as we're coming to the end of the show, I will ask you the final question. And that is, if there's one piece of advice that you wish you could go back and give your younger self, one thing that you've learned that you wish you had known back then, what would that piece of advice be?
I think I'll go real prosaic because we've been talking about a lot of different ideas here. Would just be to have the financial runway in place to do this yourself. I think if you take that step to become a firm owner, expecting the revenue is going to be slower than you want. The expenses are going to be higher than you wish. You'll be making what feels like no money and shocked that you still have to pay self-employment taxes on the tiny amount of income that you're bringing in. I think just to your point a minute ago of getting punched in the face, that's going to happen. So go ahead and expect it. And if you can get through it, I certainly do not I don't feel like I'm through that yet. I'm still not near replacing my corporate income, let alone on an inflation adjusted basis, but I can maybe see how to get there. And when Michael talks about the risk adjusted, benefit return, of being an entrepreneur, return of being an entrepreneur versus being a W-2 employee, how do you quantify having near total control over your schedule? How do you quantify taking a 30-day trip, even if you have to work some during that time? I think that knowing that's where you're moving, and then enjoying some of the benefits along the way are a good reason to keep going in this business or any other.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for being willing to put yourself out there and send us a note requesting to be on the show. I always appreciate that, but I really do appreciate you coming on and just sharing your story and being vulnerable and opening up about your journey and the way the firm ownership has gone for you. So thank you for taking the time.
Alan, thanks so much for having me on. I hope you have a great afternoon.